Do you ever wonder why some people seem to operate on a completely different level? Why, no matter what life throws at them, they keep rising, growing, and dominating their field? It's not luck. It's not genetics. It's not even about talent most of the time. What separates highly successful people from the rest isn't visible to the ordinary eye. These are hidden habits. Silent systems they've installed deep within themselves that allow them to execute consistently, without fanfare, without excuses, without the noise that consumes most people's lives. When you first meet these people, they don't seem extraordinary. You don't see fireworks. You don't see dramatic moves. But if you watch closely, if you observe them long enough, you start noticing something different. The way they wake up. The way they approach problems. The calm they carry even in chaos. The precision behind their decisions. The way they protect their energy. And most importantly, the way they keep improving silently, day after day, stacking small wins on top of each other like compound interest. You see, highly successful people have mastered the art of internal calibration. While most people react to the world, they create their world internally first. Every morning they wake up, they don't simply get up and respond to emails, notifications, and demands. Instead, they go inside. They check their internal compass. They ask themselves, where am I? What matters today? What deserves my time, my focus, my energy? They don't chase every shiny object. They don't fall into emotional traps. They have trained their mind to operate like a precision instrument. It starts with something very few talk about: mental recalibration. Every day, before the world can invade their mind, they invade their own mind first. They run a system check. What did I learn yesterday? Where did I mess up? What can I optimize? What deserves my attention today? It's not journaling for the sake of journaling. It's recalibration. Like a pilot running pre-flight checks before takeoff. You don't see the work, but you feel its impact every time they take off smoothly while others crash before even leaving the runway. They reflect daily, not occasionally, not when convenient, but like clockwork. Because they understand that self-awareness isn't a feel-good practice, it's operational necessity. Every single day, they tighten the screws on their thinking. They analyze failures not to shame themselves but to extract data. To make the next version better. They're running software updates on their brain every day while most people are still running outdated versions of themselves year after year. But it doesn't stop there. What they do after recalibrating is where the magic happens. They build something I call silent compounding. You've heard of compound interest in money. But have you ever thought about compound interest in behavior? That's how they think. Every decision, every habit, every micro-action is designed to improve by 1% today. Just 1%. Because they know that 1% daily improvements, compounded over a year, don't make them slightly better, they make them exponentially better. 37 times better, to be exact. While most people aim for big dramatic improvements that fade quickly, they stay obsessed with tiny consistent gains that never reverse. Imagine this for a second. You improve one small habit today, maybe you wake up 10 minutes earlier. Tomorrow, you make your morning routine 5% sharper. The next day, you optimize your reading habit. Over weeks, months, and years, these tiny upgrades stack so high that you end up with a completely different life structure. You don't recognize the person you were a year ago. You've evolved quietly, powerfully, permanently. This is why they build systems, not just goals. Goals are temporary. Systems are forever. They don't focus on hitting a target once. They design daily habits that guarantee they keep hitting targets long after motivation fades. It's like setting up an automatic machine that prints success daily, even when willpower is low, even when circumstances are hard. Their life becomes a smooth-running operating system, not a constant battle of motivation. And let me tell you something that most people miss completely. They don't just build these habits randomly. There's an architecture behind it. They use what I call habit stacking. One habit triggers the next. One tiny success pulls the next one automatically. Like dominoes. For example, The moment they wake up, they drink water immediately. Hydration triggers energy. That energy triggers reading. That reading triggers strategic thinking. That thinking triggers better decisions for the day. And the chain keeps moving forward automatically. Now, you might think this sounds robotic. But it's the opposite. It's liberating. Because when your systems handle the basics, your mind is free to focus on the big stuff: creativity, strategy, vision, leadership. While others are wasting brainpower deciding whether to scroll their phone or work out, highly successful people have already executed their rituals and moved into high-level problem solving before most people have had their coffee. And here's something even more powerful: they protect their time like it's their life force. Because it is. Highly successful people don't let their calendar get hijacked by everyone else's priorities. They understand that every yes to something trivial is a no to something transformative. Every distraction, every unnecessary meeting, every useless debate, it's theft. Theft of their focus, their momentum, their compound growth. So they say no. Often. Brutally. Without apology. Because they're not chasing popularity, they're building legacy. You've probably heard of the 80-20 rule, the idea that 20% of your actions produce 80% of your results. Highly successful people take that rule and weaponize it. They apply it to everything: projects, relationships, investments, even conversations. If it's not producing disproportionate returns on their time, energy, or money, it gets eliminated. Period. They're not interested in being busy. They're interested in being effective. And effectiveness requires ruthless clarity. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what moves the needle. Clarity about where their unique edge lies. And that clarity doesn't come naturally. It's built daily through reflection, analysis, and constant refinement. And yet, even with all this structure, they remain highly adaptive. Because success isn't a straight line, it's a dynamic battlefield. Things change. Markets shift. Competitors emerge. Disruptions happen. But while others panic, successful people have built emotional antifragility. They don't just survive chaos, they grow stronger from it. They see problems not as threats but as fuel. Every failure, every setback, every punch life throws at them, they absorb it, learn from it, and upgrade their operating system. This emotional antifragility is one of the most hidden, underrated superpowers you'll ever find. Most people crumble under uncertainty. They avoid discomfort like it's poison. But highly successful people seek controlled discomfort. They voluntarily expose themselves to challenges. They rehearse worst-case scenarios mentally, so nothing surprises them. They build psychological calluses that make them nearly unshakable. And here's something else almost nobody tells you. Behind their success is often a highly engineered recovery system. Yes, they work insanely hard. But they also recover deliberately. Sleep, nutrition, movement, mindfulness, these aren't luxuries for them. They're performance levers. You don't see the hours they spend protecting their sleep architecture, dialing in their nutrition, refining their training. But these invisible investments allow them to operate at levels that seem superhuman. Think about elite athletes for a moment. You don't see the thousands of hours of mobility work, rehab, hydration protocols, and sleep optimization behind the scenes. You only see them dominate on game day. The same applies to highly successful people in business, art, leadership, or any field. What you see is just the surface. The real work, the hidden habits, are buried deep beneath. Now listen carefully to this part, because it might be the most important principle of all. Highly successful people operate under what I call process worship. While everyone else is addicted to outcomes, they are addicted to process. They fall in love with the work itself. The grind. The repetition. The boring parts. Because they understand that mastery lives in the repetition. Not in the excitement. Not in the applause. But in the quiet hours when nobody's watching. When you truly study them, you realize they aren't motivated by external validation. They're internally driven by the pursuit of mastery itself. They train when nobody's watching. They study when nobody's asking. They execute when nobody cares. Because it's who they've become. And when you become the type of person who does the right things regardless of mood or audience, success becomes inevitable. Their discipline isn't random. It's built, like a muscle, through deliberate training, habit stacking, and identity shifting. They don't try to be disciplined. They've become disciplined people. And that, my friend, is the most powerful transformation any human can make. Because once discipline becomes identity, the game changes. You're no longer negotiating with yourself every morning. You don't ask, "Should I work out today?" You simply do. You don't ask, "Should I push through this problem?" You simply solve. There's no drama. No debate. Just execution. And this brings me to perhaps the deepest hidden habit of all, the invisible war they wage every single day against their own weaknesses. Highly successful people are brutal about killing their own excuses. They don't allow their mind to drift into victim narratives, blame games, or emotional stories that disempower them. When something goes wrong, they own it fully. They ask, "What did I miss? What can I control? How do I improve?" They live by extreme ownership. They understand that the fastest way to kill growth is to externalize responsibility. So they internalize everything. They absorb the pain. They process the failure. And then they act. Swiftly. Decisively. Without self-pity. You see, as we peel back more layers, the patterns become even more fascinating. Highly successful people don't just wake up one day and stumble into greatness. Their success is the result of deeply embedded behaviors that operate almost like subconscious programs, driving their actions effortlessly while most others are still negotiating with themselves. One of the most profound differences lies in how they manage decision fatigue. You might not notice it at first glance, but if you study their routines, it becomes crystal clear. While average people burn mental energy on trivial decisions, what to wear, what to eat, which task to do first, highly successful people have designed their environment to minimize unnecessary choices. They understand that willpower is finite. Decision energy is limited. And the more you waste on low-stakes decisions, the less you have left for the high-stakes ones that actually determine your future. Look at some of the highest performers on the planet. Steve Jobs famously wore the same style of black turtleneck and jeans every day. Barack Obama limited his suit choices to reduce decision fatigue. These weren't eccentric quirks. They were intentional energy-saving strategies. Because for highly successful people, preserving cognitive bandwidth for strategic thinking is non-negotiable. Their mornings aren't spent in mental clutter. They wake up into systems they've designed. The clothes are laid out. The nutrition is pre-planned. The calendar is already organized. Their first thought isn't, "What should I do today?" but, "Let's execute." They don't start their day with questions. They start with certainty. And while others get pulled into reactive cycles, responding to emails, scrolling social media, reacting to notifications, successful people have strict boundaries around their attention. They begin the day with proactive creation, not reactive consumption. They guard the first hours of the day like sacred ground, knowing that the quality of these early hours sets the tone for the entire day's performance. But it goes even deeper than that. You see, successful people understand something most completely overlook. Emotional state drives execution. You can have the best strategy, the clearest goals, the smartest plans, but if your emotional state is off, execution falters. They've built rituals specifically designed to prime their emotions for peak performance. Some use powerful visualization techniques every morning, mentally rehearsing success before it happens. They don't just visualize the outcome, they visualize themselves executing flawlessly. Handling challenges, solving problems, navigating uncertainty with calm confidence. This mental rehearsal activates the brain's mirror neurons, programming the nervous system for peak response when reality arrives. Others use breath work, activating the parasympathetic nervous system to cultivate calm, or stimulating the sympathetic nervous system to activate energy. Some have precise morning movement protocols, not simply to exercise but to neurologically prime the brain through increased BDNF levels and optimized dopamine release. Every ritual serves a purpose: to put them into a state where decisive action becomes effortless. You may have heard the saying, state first, strategy second. That's not just motivational fluff. It's neuroscience. The brain's executive function relies heavily on emotional regulation. And highly successful people have trained themselves to command their emotional states on demand. They don't wait for inspiration to strike. They create the internal conditions for inspiration to flow. Now, here's where most people start to break down: consistency. You see, starting strong isn't hard. Maintaining strength day after day, especially when life gets messy, is where the real work begins. Highly successful people don't rely on motivation to carry them through the tough days. They've automated discipline into their identity. They've programmed what I call default high standards, meaning their baseline behavior is already above average, even on bad days. While others oscillate between intense work and complete burnout, successful people operate on steady, high-output routines that rarely deviate. Consistency isn't an act for them, it's their baseline operating system. Think of elite Navy SEALs for a moment. They don't just train for the perfect conditions. They train to execute flawlessly in the worst possible conditions. Rain, exhaustion, sleep deprivation, chaos, it doesn't matter. Their systems are bulletproof. That's how highly successful people operate in life and business. Their routines are so deeply ingrained that no external chaos can knock them off course for long. But to build this level of consistency requires something even rarer: brutal honesty with oneself. Highly successful people are obsessive about accurate self-assessment. They don't lie to themselves. They don't inflate their progress. They track. They measure. They review. They are their own harshest critics, not out of self-loathing, but out of an unrelenting desire for truth. Because they know, data doesn't lie. Metrics don't lie. Tracking doesn't lie. If you ran 5 miles yesterday and only ran 2 today, the data tells the truth. If you made 20 sales calls last week but only 5 this week, the data reflects your behavior. While most people shy away from these uncomfortable facts, successful people lean into them. They use metrics like a mirror, not to shame themselves but to stay calibrated to reality. And this self-tracking extends to every area of their lives: productivity, fitness, finances, even emotional triggers. They monitor everything. Why? Because you cannot improve what you don't measure. If you want to build mastery, you need accurate feedback loops. And they've built dozens of these loops into their daily existence. When most people avoid accountability, highly successful people create extreme accountability. They hire coaches. They seek mentors. They invite feedback. They aren't afraid of hearing where they're weak, because every weakness exposed is a growth opportunity identified. They don't protect their ego, they protect their evolution. And this brings us to another invisible habit they embody. They curate their circle with surgical precision. The people around them aren't random. They deliberately engineer their inner circle to consist of individuals who challenge them, elevate them, and refuse to tolerate mediocrity. They understand that proximity is power. You become who you surround yourself with. Period. They avoid the energy vampires, the complainers, the victims, the drama seekers. Because they know one truth that governs long-term success: environment beats willpower. No matter how strong you are, if you consistently surround yourself with people who normalize weakness, you will adapt downward. Highly successful people adapt upward by staying in proximity to excellence. And let's not forget one of their most underrated superpowers: patience. While the masses are addicted to instant gratification, quick wins, overnight success fantasies, viral moments, highly successful people play the long game. They think in decades, not days. They build with durability in mind. They aren't chasing fads, they're building empires. When others panic during short-term losses, they remain calm. When others chase trends, they stay committed to fundamentals. Because they understand that true wealth, mastery, and impact compound over long horizons. And they know that most people lose because they quit too soon. Highly successful people view setbacks not as failure but as part of the process. When something doesn't work, they don't spiral emotionally. They analyze. They adjust. They pivot. They stay in motion. They understand that failure isn't fatal, quitting is. So they never stop moving. And while most people spend endless hours consuming entertainment, successful people are voracious learners. But not in a passive, scattered way. Their learning is highly intentional. They don't read just to feel productive. They read to solve problems. They study models. They reverse engineer success. Every piece of information they consume is filtered through one question. How can I apply this? Their learning is connected directly to action. They don't get lost in information paralysis. They operate in a tight cycle: learn, apply, review, refine. That's why their learning curves are steep, their skill stacks are deep, and their value creation accelerates exponentially while others plateau. And behind all of this is perhaps the most hidden habit of all: identity engineering. Highly successful people don't simply focus on what they do, they obsess over who they are becoming. They design their identity with intention. They ask themselves powerful questions. Who do I need to become to achieve what I want? And then they align their behavior with that future identity, even before they fully feel ready. This is the secret weapon most never talk about. When you act as if you're already disciplined, focused, strategic version of yourself, your brain rewires itself to catch up. You shift from behavior modification to identity transformation. And when identity shifts, behavior becomes effortless. That's why you see these individuals sustaining world-class performance for years, even decades. Because it's no longer something they have to force. It's simply who they are. And all of these hidden habits: internal calibration, compounding micro-improvements, ruthless prioritization, emotional antifragility, decision fatigue elimination, environmental engineering, radical accountability, long-term patience, accelerated learning, and identity engineering, they don't operate in isolation. They stack. They amplify each other. They create a powerful, self-reinforcing system that propels these individuals into levels of achievement most people never even glimpse. While the world chases hacks and shortcuts, highly successful people live by principles that never expire. They build unshakable foundations. And as you continue listening, I'm going to take you even deeper into these hidden systems, because if you understand them, internalize them, and apply them, you will start to experience levels of growth, clarity, and power that will feel almost unnatural at first. But it won't be unnatural. It will simply be the natural consequence of installing the hidden habits that quietly drive extraordinary success. Let's go even deeper now. Because what we've covered so far, that's only the surface. The truly hidden habits of highly successful people operate at levels most never think about. They don't just control their behavior, their time, or their environment. They control something far more powerful: their thinking architecture. You see, highly successful people don't think like the masses. They've systematically reprogrammed the very structure of how their mind processes information. Their mental models, the invisible frameworks through which they interpret reality, are what allow them to navigate complex situations with clarity while others freeze, panic, or get overwhelmed. Most people default to linear thinking: if I do X, I get Y. But the world isn't linear. Success isn't linear. Highly successful people operate using systems thinking. They see the interconnections between variables, the second and third order consequences of every decision. They don't just think about how a move impacts today, they calculate how it compounds over years, how it interacts with dozens of other moving parts. When faced with a decision, they don't simply ask, "Will this work?" They ask, "How will this decision ripple across my entire system? What unintended consequences might emerge? How does this align with my long-term vision?" It's chess, not checkers. And they're playing 20 moves ahead while others are fixated on their next paycheck or quarterly bonus. This level of thinking allows them to avoid costly mistakes most people never even see coming. While others chase immediate wins, they optimize for system durability. They're not interested in fragile success that collapses under pressure. They want sustainable, scalable, antifragile systems that grow stronger under stress. And how do they develop this? Through deliberate mental modeling. They study relentlessly, not just their industry, but economics, psychology, biology, philosophy. They borrow models from diverse fields and integrate them into their thinking. This cross-disciplinary synthesis gives them unique advantages in problem solving. For example, they understand the power of feedback loops. Positive feedback loops amplify strength. Negative feedback loops accelerate failure. So they design systems that feed virtuous cycles, where every action reinforces the next in their favor. And they ruthlessly identify and break destructive loops before they compound into catastrophe. They apply inversion, asking, "What would guarantee failure?" and then systematically avoiding those behaviors. They use probabilistic thinking, assigning weighted likelihoods to outcomes rather than chasing certainties that don't exist. They embrace opportunity cost, recognizing that every choice carries the hidden price of what they're not doing instead. This is why they appear so calm in crises. Because while others are emotionally reacting, they're running advanced mental simulations. They've already rehearsed these scenarios in their mind. They've game-planned contingencies. They see the chaos coming before it arrives and position themselves to capitalize on it. But it goes even further. Highly successful people have mastered what I call emotional time travel. They don't just live in the present. They regularly project themselves into the future, experiencing in their mind the rewards or regrets of today's choices. This allows them to resist short-term gratification because they feel the long-term consequences vividly. When faced with temptation to skip a workout, to waste time, to make an impulsive decision, they mentally visit their future self and ask, "How will I feel about this choice 5 years from now?" That future orientation gives them superhuman discipline. They don't rely on willpower alone. They leverage time perspective as an emotional lever to control present behavior. And this long-term thinking also applies to how they build their personal skill stacks. Most people specialize narrowly. Highly successful people build what I call compound skill stacks. They become world-class at combining rare combinations of complementary skills. Think of someone like Elon Musk. It's not that he's the absolute best engineer, or marketer, or leader, or strategist. It's that he's dangerously good at all of them, simultaneously. That multiplicative effect is what creates outsized success. The intersection of diverse skill sets is where exponential value is created. Highly successful people deliberately build these skill stacks. They're constantly learning not just more about their core expertise, but about negotiation, communication, leadership, technology, finance, psychology. Every new skill they layer amplifies the value of the others. While most people remain narrowly replaceable, they become uniquely irreplaceable. And the way they learn is different too. They don't passively consume information. They actively deconstruct it. When studying a new skill, they identify the critical leverage points, the 20% of knowledge that drives 80% of results. They focus on first principles, foundational truths that don't change, and build upward from there. They apply what I call aggressive application cycles. Learn a concept, immediately apply it in real-world scenarios, get feedback, adjust, repeat. This rapid iteration allows them to compress learning curves that take others years into months or even weeks. But perhaps the most invisible habit of all lies in how they handle identity threats. You see, most people unconsciously protect their ego. They avoid information or feedback that challenges their self-image. They get defensive when weaknesses are exposed. They crave certainty and validation. Highly successful people have trained themselves to do the opposite. They seek identity threat. Not because they enjoy pain, but because they know that confronting uncomfortable truths is the fastest path to growth. They see every exposure of weakness as a priceless gift. Good. Now I know where I can improve. This requires profound emotional maturity. The ability to separate self-worth from current performance. To recognize that weakness is not a permanent flaw but a temporary state awaiting development. They don't view feedback as criticism. They view it as intelligence gathering for self-optimization. And because of this, they evolve faster than anyone around them. While others defend their current identity, they upgrade theirs continuously. Their sense of self is fluid, adaptable, always in beta. This constant identity evolution allows them to keep outgrowing their past selves while others remain stuck, trapped inside rigid self-concepts. Now you may be wondering, how do they handle the inevitable mental noise? The doubts, the insecurities, the intrusive thoughts that plague everyone? They don't eliminate them. They observe them. They practice metacognition, thinking about their thinking. They create distance between stimulus and response. Instead of being controlled by thoughts, they study them like data points. When negative thoughts arise, I'm not good enough, this might fail, what if I mess up? They don't suppress them. They analyze. Interesting. That's my fear circuit firing. Noted. And then they refocus on action. They've trained their mind to return to mission focus regardless of emotional turbulence. This is mental sovereignty. The ability to maintain executive control over your own cognition. Highly successful people have built this like a muscle through meditation, reflection, journaling, and exposure to high-pressure environments that force emotional regulation. And underlying all of this is one final habit that may be the hardest of all. Radical responsibility. No matter what happens, market crashes, bad luck, betrayal, unforeseen crises, they take ownership. Always. They never allow external factors to determine their internal state or their belief in personal agency. If a deal falls through, they don't blame the economy. They ask, where did I misread risk? How can I build stronger buffers? If a project fails, they don't blame partners. They ask, where did I fail to align incentives or vet properly? They don't waste energy on victim narratives. Every failure becomes data. Every setback becomes training. And this radical responsibility creates an internal stability that's almost unshakable. Because when you believe you're always in control of your response, you're never powerless. You're never dependent on external circumstances for your growth. You become adaptive, resilient, unstoppable. All of these hidden habits, they form a closed feedback loop that self-reinforces growth. Mental models fuel better decisions. Better decisions fuel better outcomes. Better outcomes fuel stronger identity. Stronger identity fuels greater responsibility. Greater responsibility fuels deeper learning. And the cycle continues upward, indefinitely. This is why highly successful people seem to accelerate away from the pack as time goes on. It's not that they work harder every year, it's that their systems compound. Their decision-making compounds. Their wisdom compounds. Their networks compound. Their capital compounds. Their emotional mastery compounds. Every domain amplifies every other domain. While others plateau, they stack advantages upon advantages until the gap becomes nearly unbridgeable. And yet, here's the most empowering truth of all. Every one of these hidden habits can be learned. They are not genetic gifts. They are not reserved for a select few. They are disciplines. Trainable, replicable, available to anyone willing to pay the price of mastery. But very few do. Because the price is high. The work is unglamorous. The accountability is uncomfortable. The growth demands the death of old versions of yourself. But for those who commit, for those who are willing to enter this path, the rewards are beyond comprehension. Because you don't just achieve success. You become the kind of person for whom success is inevitable, inescapable, and permanent. If you're still with me, it means you're beginning to see the deeper pattern emerge. You're starting to understand that highly successful people don't operate by chance. They move through life governed by powerful, layered internal codes, systems so embedded into their daily existence that they don't need to think about them anymore. It's automatic. And now, we enter an even more advanced layer of their hidden mastery, how they control momentum. Momentum is everything. The average person tries to get motivated every day. They hope that by watching a video, reading a quote, or receiving some external jolt, they'll find enough fuel to push through. But highly successful people don't rely on motivation. They manufacture momentum, and once that momentum is moving, it becomes a force of nature. Momentum operates like compound interest in motion. In the early stages, it's barely noticeable. The gains feel slow. Progress seems invisible. But once enough volume of consistent, aligned action stacks up, the curve bends sharply upward. And once that inflection point hits, they accelerate past everyone else so quickly that people around them assume some unfair advantage must exist. But there's no unfair advantage. It's disciplined momentum engineering. Highly successful people know that their number one job is to protect forward motion. Stagnation is death. Even tiny progress is infinitely better than standing still. This is why, even on their worst days, they execute. Even when tired, discouraged, or frustrated, they move something forward. Because they understand that stopping is dangerous, not because they'll lose ground, but because restarting requires exponentially more effort. Picture a freight train starting from a dead stop. It takes tremendous energy to overcome inertia. But once in motion, that same train can crash through obstacles that would have stopped it cold while stationary. Successful people build themselves into mental freight trains. They never allow complete stops. And to protect this momentum, they employ a ruthless technique: kill perfectionism early. You see, perfectionism is the enemy of momentum. It tricks you into overthinking, into waiting for ideal conditions, into polishing endlessly before you ship, launch, speak, or act. Successful people destroy perfectionism with a single mindset. Version 1 is better than version none. They act, launch, iterate, improve, but they always keep moving. They know that momentum feeds clarity. Action clarifies what works and what doesn't. Overanalysis without action is mental masturbation, impressive sounding, but completely useless. They prefer messy progress over perfect paralysis every single time. And it doesn't stop there. Successful people build momentum vertically and horizontally across their life domains. Business, health, relationships, finance, learning. They don't compartmentalize growth, they cross-pollinate it. Improvements in one area fuel advances in others. A personal fitness breakthrough sharpens their energy for business execution. Business wins create capital that fuels investments. Relationship mastery reduces emotional turbulence, allowing deeper focus on big goals. Their life operates as one integrated system. Every domain feeds momentum into the others. This multi-domain integration creates an upward spiral effect. While others struggle to balance fragmented pieces of life, successful people unify everything into one self-reinforcing growth engine. Now here's where it becomes even more surgical. Successful people track and adjust their momentum mathematically. They monitor their output in quantifiable ways: number of deep work hours executed weekly, percentage of strategic tasks completed, progress metrics for key projects, learning hours logged, revenue pipelines monitored, physical health biomarkers tracked. Why so much measurement? Because what you measure, you manage. What you manage, you improve. Successful people remove emotional guessing from progress. They want hard data, because hard data tells the truth whether they feel good or bad about a week. And when they detect slippage, when momentum weakens, they react instantly. They don't let weeks turn into months of drift. They have recovery protocols designed to re-engage speed quickly. Adjust sleep, dial and nutrition, reassess priorities, trim distractions. Sometimes, all it takes is 2 or 3 quick system adjustments to reignite full momentum. You see, average people often mistake discipline for endless self-control. They think these people possess some superhuman willpower to grind endlessly. But that's not it at all. It's not about willpower. It's about systematic realignment. They've built triggers, systems, and rituals that realign them quickly whenever momentum dips. Think of it like a pilot constantly correcting micro-course adjustments. The plane doesn't stay perfectly on target the whole flight, it drifts slightly, constantly. But because the autopilot is continually adjusting, it reaches the destination with precision. Highly successful people operate this way in every aspect of life. And this brings us to another critical hidden habit. They weaponize energy management above time management. You see, average performers focus heavily on managing their schedule, blocking hours, to-do lists, task batching. But highly successful people know that managing time without managing energy is worthless. If your brain is foggy at 10 a.m., it doesn't matter that your calendar says strategy work for that hour. You won't execute well. That's why successful people design daily rhythms around peak energy windows. They've studied their own physiology and psychology to identify when they think most creatively, when they focus most intensely, when they need recovery, when decision-making is sharpest. They time critical work to coincide with these peak windows. Important decisions aren't made when fatigued. Strategic planning isn't scheduled after 4 p.m. crashes. Deep creative work is protected in their highest cognitive states. And recovery is not an afterthought. It's an integral part of the performance equation. Many of them employ biofeedback tools, heart rate variability monitors, sleep trackers, glucose monitors, cognitive load assessments. They optimize micronutrient protocols. They engineer light exposure for circadian alignment. They understand their brain operates as a high-performance machine, and every machine requires proper fuel, maintenance, and calibration. That's why their performance looks effortless to outsiders. They're not pushing harder, they're operating cleaner. Now let's go even deeper, because we're not even close to the core yet. One of the most dangerous traps average people fall into is external goal attachment. They fixate on hitting specific outcomes, income targets, promotions, awards, follower counts. And when these aren't reached quickly enough, frustration and discouragement kick in. Many quit entirely. Highly successful people flip this completely. Their primary obsession is not external goals, it's process dominance. They fall in love with becoming the type of person who executes process relentlessly, regardless of the scorecard in any given moment. Because they know that if process dominance is maintained, external success becomes inevitable. They shift their identity away from, "I want to hit this goal," into, "I am the type of person who trains daily, executes decisively, adjusts intelligently, and learns relentlessly." This identity level shift insulates them emotionally from the roller coaster of external fluctuations. They might miss targets temporarily. A launch might underperform. A market crash might hit revenue. But these don't destabilize them because their self-worth isn't attached to those numbers. Their identity is rooted in process execution, and process can always be controlled. And this process-centered identity allows them to endure the long, invisible years that break most people. The years of unrecognized grinding. The years of painful learning curves. The years when it feels like progress is invisible while others seem to be passing them. You've heard people say, "He was an overnight success." But when you peel back the story, you always discover 10 to 15 years of unseen compound process mastery. That's how it works. And highly successful people are emotionally prepared for this because their reward comes not from external applause, but from internal excellence. And here's something most never even realize. This allows them to play bigger games with less fear. When your self-worth isn't fragilely attached to external wins, you're willing to take bigger swings. You'll launch projects that might fail. You'll attempt deals that might not close. You'll enter markets where you might get crushed. And because you're not paralyzed by outcome attachment, you learn faster, iterate faster, and eventually dominate those arenas. Risk tolerance increases exponentially when emotional attachment to outcomes decreases. That's why highly successful people can simultaneously seem aggressive and calm. They're taking bold moves, but their internal state remains composed, because their process remains intact regardless of outcomes. And when you multiply this over years, you get the ultimate advantage, asymmetrical risk mastery. They position themselves to take swings where upside potential vastly exceeds downside risk, over and over again. And because they stay emotionally steady through wins and losses, they survive long enough to eventually hit game-changing inflection points. This is how empires are built. Not through sudden genius. Not through magical luck. But through ruthless process engineering, sustained momentum compounding, and emotional detachment from short-term fluctuations. The deeper we go, the clearer it becomes that everything highly successful people do operates under layers and layers of intentional design. They've engineered not just their behaviors or daily rituals, but the very architecture of how they perceive reality itself. This is where most people never reach. This is where we cross from visible discipline into invisible mastery. One of the most powerful systems these individuals build is their ability to detach from emotional noise. The average person lives in a constant tug-of-war between external circumstances and internal reactions. Good news? They feel good. Bad news? They spiral into frustration, fear, anxiety. Their emotional state is reactive, fragile, easily hijacked. Highly successful people operate completely differently. They've trained themselves to separate what happens from how they feel about it. They do not allow circumstances to dictate their emotional stability. They understand a simple, profound truth: emotions are real, but they are not always true. Thoughts are real, but they are not always accurate. Feelings are data, not commands. When faced with a setback, an investor pulls out, a deal collapses, a product launch underperforms, they don't go into emotional spirals. They zoom out. They observe the event like an outside strategist analyzing data. They ask, "What happened? What can I learn? Where was the system weak? What signal is this feedback providing?" This ability to depersonalize feedback is one of the greatest mental advantages they possess. While most people take failure personally, interpreting it as evidence of personal inadequacy, highly successful people interpret failure as system information. They have essentially rewired their nervous system to expect and accept volatility as part of the process. Success, to them, is not the absence of problems, it's the ability to navigate an endless sequence of challenges without emotional destabilization. And this stability creates an immense advantage. Because while others waste days, weeks, or months emotionally processing setbacks, highly successful people adjust course within hours. They move immediately from, "Why did this happen to me?" into, "What adjustment do I make next?" Their recovery speed is astonishing. Now let's go even deeper into how they maintain this stability. They control mental input streams with surgical precision. The average person's mind is assaulted daily by low-quality noise, social media arguments, political outrage cycles, gossip, entertainment drama, fear-based news cycles. All of this injects anxiety, distraction, emotional volatility into their cognitive system. Highly successful people eliminate these inputs almost entirely. Their mental diet is as carefully curated as their physical nutrition. They understand that what you consume mentally determines your default emotional state, your attention quality, and your cognitive bandwidth. They do not argue online. They do not consume fear-driven news cycles. They do not engage with drama-filled content. They starve emotional parasites from entering their operating system. Instead, they build signal-rich information loops. They consume content that sharpens thinking, challenges assumptions, expands models, and improves decision-making. Books, interviews with operators, technical analysis, economic models, tactical case studies, peer conversations with high-level thinkers, long-form, deeply researched content, all filtered through one question: does this make me sharper? Their attention is their most valuable asset, and they guard it like their life depends on it, because it does. Now understand this: controlling input is not about naivety or ignorance. They are not unaware of the world's problems. They are hyper-aware, but they consume strategically, not reactively. They gather data to inform moves, not to indulge outrage or anxiety. This creates an emotional immunity most people never develop. While others are constantly reactive to the emotional chaos of the world, they remain surgical, calculating, focused. And this focus allows them to make better asymmetrical decisions. Asymmetrical decisions are moves where the upside is massive, and the downside is minimal or manageable. The average person rarely sees these opportunities because they're too distracted, too reactive, too emotionally compromised. Highly successful people are constantly scanning for these windows. They understand that life doesn't offer unlimited shots at life-changing opportunities. But when they appear, you must be clear-headed enough to recognize and seize them. They will often say yes to deals, investments, relationships, or projects that others fear because their mental models allow them to calculate risk accurately. They aren't gambling, they're placing calculated bets where upside greatly exceeds potential loss. And because they've built such robust systems of momentum, learning, and adaptability, even when these bets don't work, they recover rapidly. The risk is always asymmetrical because failure simply feeds their system more data to iterate and improve. Let's pause here for a moment, because I need you to fully absorb this next principle. This may be one of the most hidden yet decisive habits of the highly successful. They've completely detached self-worth from external scoreboards. This is counterintuitive, but it's everything. The average person builds identity around fragile markers: income, status, public praise, social validation. When those markers fluctuate, which they always do, identity destabilizes. Confidence crumbles. Fear of failure skyrockets. Risk-taking shuts down. Highly successful people build identity around behavior integrity. Their internal scoreboard measures one thing. Did I execute my process today? Did I train? Did I learn? Did I take calculated risks? Did I lead with integrity? Did I sharpen my skills? Did I protect my momentum? If yes, they won the day, regardless of external outcomes. This identity construction creates immense internal peace, even amidst external chaos. Because whether they win or lose publicly, their self-respect remains intact. They are playing an infinite game against themselves, not a finite game for applause. This is why you'll often find them taking risks that others would avoid, not because they are reckless, but because their self-worth isn't at stake if things don't work out. They are insulated from the approval addiction that paralyzes most people. And this internal confidence allows them to move faster. Speed compounds. Highly successful people understand that time is the most dangerous variable in business and life. The longer you delay decisions, hesitate on actions, or procrastinate on risks, the more opportunities evaporate. They bias toward rapid testing, rapid learning, rapid iteration. When facing uncertain opportunities, they don't obsess over perfect information, which rarely exists. They gather enough data to make an informed, asymmetric move, and then act. Because they know, perfect speed beats perfect decisions. If a decision turns out suboptimal, their systems adjust course fast. But waiting months for certainty kills momentum irreversibly. The market, the landscape, the opportunity windows don't wait for your comfort. Speed wins. This is why their lives often look chaotic to outsiders. Constant pivots, bold moves, rapid shifts. But under the surface, it's not chaos. It's controlled, adaptive momentum. A living, breathing system of learning and execution. Now you might be asking, how do they maintain such courage to move so boldly? Because they've trained a final hidden habit, existential detachment. You see, most people subconsciously attach success to personal survival. If this fails, I'm ruined. If this relationship ends, I'll collapse. If I lose this deal, I'll never recover. Highly successful people strip these attachments early. They recognize that even if projects collapse, deals fall apart, or ventures fail, it's not existential. They'll still wake up. They'll still breathe. They'll still build again. By emotionally separating what they do from who they are, they become fearless builders. Their core belief is simple. I can always rebuild. This creates an unshakable courage most people never access. Because while others play scared, avoiding failure, playing small to preserve comfort, highly successful people swing aggressively. Not recklessly. Aggressively. Because they've killed the emotional death grip most people have around outcomes. And that is where massive, generational success is born. Not in playing it safe. Not in waiting for guarantees. But in building internal systems so strong that you can take massive swings, knowing that no matter the result, you'll grow stronger either way. Now let's go even deeper. Because the most hidden layers, the ones almost nobody sees, they're not just about external moves, or even internal systems. They go straight into how these individuals engineer reality itself. Yes, you heard me right. Highly successful people do not simply respond to reality. They construct it. They build a private, powerful mental operating system that quite literally rewires how they perceive the world around them. The average person is a victim of circumstances. When life gets harder, when challenges appear, when things don't go as planned, they break, they shrink, they quit. Why? Because their interpretation of reality is controlled by fear, scarcity, and emotional turbulence. But highly successful people have designed something radically different. They operate inside of mental sovereignty. You see, they've trained themselves to separate two worlds. The objective world, what's actually happening. The interpretive world, what they choose to believe about what's happening. Where the average person immediately assigns meaning. This is bad, this is unfair, this is painful. Highly successful people assign useful meaning that fuels forward motion. When a project fails, they don't say, "This means I'm not good enough." Instead, they say, "This is simply information. This is feedback. This is my tuition for mastery. This is my advantage over those who will quit here." They do not experience failure the same way the masses do. Because while the masses attach identity to outcomes, the highly successful attach strategy to outcomes. Every result is processed through one lens. How can I use this? And this creates what I call the invincibility loop. Action feedback adjustment failure no longer exists. There is only data. There is only iteration. Now, this is not natural. This is not automatic. This is trained. They have deliberately installed mental reframing systems into their daily lives. Every setback is automatically translated through cognitive frameworks that preserve momentum. This was expected. This is part of my training. This strengthens my systems. I'm being stress tested for higher levels. The market is teaching me something. And while others emotionally collapse at the first major setback, the highly successful get sharper, clearer, more dangerous with every loss. Because they understand something most people never internalize. The obstacle is the path. They seek stress. They seek friction. They seek resistance. Because that's where the real edge is forged. You've probably heard people talk about grit. But grit isn't simply pushing through pain. Grit is about having a pre-built framework that transforms pain into power automatically. They don't resist hard seasons, they harvest from them. And this brings us into one of their most rare skills. Stress conversion. You see, everyone experiences stress. But highly successful people have trained themselves to convert stress into performance fuel. When anxiety hits the average person, they tighten up, they shrink, they panic. But highly successful people channel that exact same cortisol spike into hyperfocus. They've trained their nervous system through exposure, practice, and controlled risk to respond to pressure with clarity. Think of elite military operators, top-level athletes, or crisis CEOs. When everyone else freezes, they sharpen. Their breathing slows. Their heart rate stabilizes. Their mind becomes hyper-focused. This is not genetics. This is stress inoculation. They've built a relationship with pressure through thousands of micro-reps, speaking when nervous, launching when uncertain, leading when stakes are high, until their brain interprets pressure not as danger, but as signal. It's time to rise. And this is why, as stakes increase, they don't break. They rise. Because they've inverted their relationship with fear entirely. For the average person, fear equals stop. For the highly successful, fear equals signal to go. Fear means they've hit a growth edge. Fear means opportunity. Fear means they're entering territory most others are too weak to enter, and therefore where the real advantage is hidden. This is not motivational talk. This is tactical neuroscience. They've trained their amygdala response. Where the average person gets hijacked by fight or flight, the highly successful experience fight and focus. They don't suppress fear. They repurpose it. Now you may be wondering, but don't they get overwhelmed? Don't they ever feel burnout? Yes. Of course. But here's another secret. Highly successful people design recovery cycles with the same precision they design execution. Most people push until they crash. Then recover haphazardly. Then repeat the destructive cycle. Highly successful people operate like elite athletes. They build cyclical peak rest models, deep execution cycles, scheduled deloads, active recovery protocols, pre-planned strategic rest periods. Their rest isn't lazy. It's intentional. It's structured. It's engineered to refuel for the next growth sprint. This is why they can maintain extreme output for years while others burn out in months. They view recovery as part of performance. Sleep optimization, nutritional precision, breath work, cold exposure, light therapy, meditation, deep work-rest cycling. All built into a system, not occasional, not reactive, but designed. You see, at this level, everything becomes system engineering. Success isn't about trying harder. It's about constructing operating systems where excellence happens automatically. And that includes one of their most misunderstood superpowers, identity fluidity. The average person clings to identity labels. I'm an introvert. I'm not good at sales. I've never been disciplined. That's just not who I am. Highly successful people refuse this. They understand identity is not fixed. Identity is software. They ask themselves constantly, who do I need to become next? And then they behave as if that version already exists. Not in delusion, but in strategic self-programming. They act like the disciplined person before they feel disciplined. They act like the confident leader before they feel confident. They act like the world-class operator before the world calls them one. And through these behavioral reps, the neural pathways adapt. The software rewrites. The identity shifts. This is how someone goes from broke to billionaire. Not through luck. Through repeated identity upgrades. They're constantly killing old versions of themselves to allow better versions to emerge. And this is where most people fail entirely. The average person fears death of identity. The highly successful engineer serial identity death as a requirement for growth. Because they understand, every new level of life requires a version of you the previous version cannot access. If you cling to who you've been, you block who you're becoming. And so they've built comfort with personal evolution. They shed skins constantly. They release attachments to old stories, old labels, old roles. Because growth demands it. Because scale demands it. Because mastery demands it. And now we enter perhaps the most invisible layer of all. The level very few will ever access. We've come a long way. But now we enter the most guarded chambers, the levels of mastery that rarely get spoken of, even among top performers. This is where highly successful people begin playing a completely different game, the game of leverage. Leverage is the ultimate force multiplier. It's what allows a single individual to produce outputs far beyond what seems humanly possible. While most people are trapped in linear effort, 1 hour of work equals 1 hour of results, highly successful people stack layers of leverage that bend reality in their favor. The first form of leverage they master is time leverage. Time leverage isn't about working harder. It's about separating inputs from outputs. While most people trade hours for dollars, highly successful people build systems where effort compounds long after the initial work is done. They write books that sell while they sleep. They build businesses that operate without their constant presence. They create digital products, intellectual property, licensing deals, equity positions. Every hour invested produces exponential, ongoing returns. They design systems where work once, benefit indefinitely becomes their operational norm. This is why their income, impact, and influence seem to explode while others plateau. But time leverage is only the starting point. The next layer is capita. L leverage. Highly successful people understand that money isn't for spending, it's for multiplying. While the masses view capital emotionally. I made money, now I can consume. Highly successful people view capital as stored energy that can be deployed to acquire more leverage. They invest not just for returns, but for positioning. They buy equity in businesses they believe will compound. They acquire assets that produce cash flow. They partner with other operators where their money fuels someone else's genius, creating returns with minimal active effort. Every dollar becomes a tiny worker operating for them 24/7. They don't hoard capital. They deploy capital. Because they understand, hoarded capital dies. Deployed capital multiplies. And this brings us to a more advanced, often invisible form of leverage, people leverage. Average performers try to do everything themselves. Highly successful people build teams, partnerships, and networks that extend their capabilities beyond any individual limit. They hire talent smarter than them in specialized domains. They delegate operational complexities to operators who thrive in those arenas. They partner with other high performers whose strengths complement their own. They don't chase titles like solo founder or self-made. They chase systems of talent aggregation. Because they understand. One world-class operator can outperform 50 mediocre ones. They recruit obsessively, vet rigorously, compensate generously, and expect elite execution. Their network becomes a force multiplier. When they face a new challenge, they don't wonder. Can I solve this? They ask. Who can solve this? Their Rolodex is an arsenal. Capital is useful. Time is precious. But talent? Talent is everything. And even beyond people leverage, they stack technology leverage. Highly successful people are early adopters of automation, AI software, and systems that multiply execution speed. They study tech trends, not just for interest, but for deployment. They build dashboards that provide real-time intelligence on operations. They automate redundant tasks that used to consume entire teams. They use data science to inform strategy. They apply AI models to optimize decision-making. Because they understand. In the coming decades, the differential between those who deploy tech leverage and those who don't will resemble the differential between farmers and industrialists during the first revolution. They don't fear technology replacing them. They fear not learning fast enough to partner with it. And this leads us into perhaps the most rare, most guarded form of leverage, reputation leverage. You see, at a certain level, your name becomes your greatest asset. Highly successful people protect and build reputational capital like the most fragile and precious resource. Because once earned, reputation produces access to deals others never see. Invitations into exclusive rooms. Strategic partnerships that accelerate growth. Opportunities that compound far beyond what capital alone can buy. Their name opens doors that money cannot. But this reputation isn't built on branding or marketing alone. It's built on integrity of execution, consistency of delivery, quiet power moves that others respect, patterns of winning repeatedly, across arenas. Highly successful people understand that one moment of compromised integrity can evaporate decades of reputational leverage. So they operate with brutal standards of honesty, precision, and respect for those they partner with. They don't overpromise. They don't underdeliver. They don't burn bridges casually. Because they know, trust is currency. Now let's zoom out. What's really happening here? Highly successful people are stacking all forms of leverage simultaneously. Time leverage, capital leverage, people leverage, technology leverage, reputation leverage. Each layer amplifies the others. Capital allows them to hire better people. Better people build better technology. Better technology scales operations. Scaled operations build reputation. Reputation opens capital deals. And the loop continues upward. This compounding flywheel creates what the outside world sees as unfair advantages, or overnight empires. But in reality, it's decades of layered leverage architecture. And this leverage allows them to operate in nonlinear games. The average person plays finite, zero-sum games, get a promotion, get a raise, compete for limited opportunities. Highly successful people play infinite, scalable games. Build platforms where value compounds regardless of effort. Create partnerships where everyone wins exponentially. Design assets that produce returns whether they're present or not. Their success isn't capped by hours worked. It's capped only by how much leverage they've layered. Now, here's a truth that's uncomfortable for most to hear. Leverage rewards character. Because the higher the leverage, the more amplified your weaknesses become. If you're disorganized, leverage will magnify chaos. If you're emotionally volatile, leverage will magnify mistakes. If you lack integrity, leverage will magnify collapse. This is why highly successful people do the invisible inner work before stacking external leverage. They build emotional stability, cognitive clarity, relational precision, strategic calm. Because only stable operators can handle exponential leverage without self-destruction. And this is why so many who chase shortcuts, hacks, and viral tactics eventually implode. They attempt to stack leverage before they've stabilized the operating system within. Highly successful people do it in reverse. Stability first. Leverage second. Exponential third. And this is where we now arrive at the highest levels. The levels where wealth, impact, and legacy are no longer personal pursuits, but global force multipliers. Because at these levels, success isn't about them anymore. It's about systems that outlive them. It's about empires that operate generationally. It's about creating frameworks that shape industries, markets, and even cultures. And in the next layers, we'll unlock how highly successful people think about legacy architecture, the final evolution of their hidden habits. We've arrived at one of the final frontiers. By this stage, highly successful people have already engineered internal discipline, systemized momentum, mastered emotional sovereignty, built layers of leverage, and established an operational infrastructure that compounds far beyond their daily input. But now, their thinking shifts again, into something very few ever reach: legacy architecture. You see, up until this point, much of their work has been about building the machine. Building themselves, building their businesses, building leverage engines that allow their influence, wealth, and power to scale. But highly successful people understand one more brutal truth. Everything they've built can still die with them, unless they engineer permanence. This is where most successful people stop, but where the truly exceptional ones begin asking the deeper question: how do I create something that outlives me? Legacy in their world is not about statues, awards, or even public praise. It's not about being remembered for ego. Legacy is a system that self-sustains and self-compounds even after they're gone. It's about embedding principles, values, infrastructure, and human capital into their creation so the machine runs far beyond the limitations of their own lifetime. Let's break this invisible habit wide open. The first rule highly successful people follow when building legacy is this: transfer decision-making, not just wealth. The average wealthy person builds assets but fails to transfer wisdom. They pass down capital but leave the next generation ill-equipped to manage it. That's why most family wealth disappears within 3 generations, because wealth alone is fragile. Competence is durable. Highly successful people actively engineer generational competence. They mentor their children, protégés, and partners not just in what to own, but in how to think. They teach mental models, frameworks, values, operating principles. They pass down the very system of decision-making that built their empire. Because they know that if their successors can think like operators, capital will self-regenerate endlessly. The second rule of legacy is institutionalize the culture. While most companies crumble after their founder exits, highly successful individuals build organizations with embedded cultures that can withstand leadership transitions. They codify decision frameworks, core values, hiring protocols, conflict resolution models, innovation pipelines, incentive systems. Their organizations don't depend on charisma or personal genius. They depend on principle-based operating systems that remain stable regardless of who sits in the CEO chair. That's why companies like Berkshire Hathaway, Toyota, or certain private family empires last for generations. The founders' personal habits have been transmuted into institutional DNA. The third rule of legacy is create irreversible impact vehicles. Highly successful people don't just build businesses. They build platforms that continue serving humanity long after their operational involvement. They create foundations with ironclad governance structures, research institutes that push forward science and technology, educational institutions that spread knowledge to millions, philanthropic systems that continue deploying capital strategically for decades. But even here, they operate differently than the masses. They avoid blind emotional charity. They structure these vehicles with strategic rigor, ensuring every dollar compounds impact, not just temporary feel-good projects. They treat philanthropy with the same operational excellence as their businesses: clear KPIs, transparent governance, expert operators, and long-term measurement of outcomes. The fourth rule of legacy is mentor the multipliers. Highly successful people don't just try to impact millions directly. They focus on empowering a small group of multipliers, individuals who carry their principles into thousands of new directions. They know that training one operator properly can impact industries. They know that mentoring one world-class leader can shape governments. They know that empowering one multiplier can touch millions they'll never meet. That's why they carefully select, mentor, and empower the next generation of architects, not workers, but builders who carry the DNA forward. The fifth rule of legacy is perhaps the most counterintuitive: detach emotionally from permanence. You see, highly successful people are not attached to their name living forever. They are attached to the work living forever. They are not obsessed with personal recognition. They are obsessed with durable systems that continue delivering value long after the world forgets who originally created them. Because they understand, ego is fragile. Impact is permanent. Many great builders you've never heard of have shaped your daily life. The engineers who designed your city's water systems, the scientists behind your medicine, the quiet investors behind your technology. Their names aren't famous, but their impact governs the world. Highly successful people at the highest levels embrace this quiet form of immortality, systems that survive without personal glory. Now, if you listen very carefully, you'll realize something profound. At this stage, highly successful people are no longer playing a game of personal growth, personal wealth, or personal success. They're playing a game of civilization building. Because once you understand how systems scale beyond lifetimes, you're no longer thinking about your own life at all. You're thinking in 50-year cycles, 100-year cycles, multi-generational cycles. How does this decision today ripple 100 years from now? How will this institution handle decisions after I'm gone? What seeds can I plant now that create entire forests for people I'll never meet? And this type of thinking is why they build with patience most cannot comprehend. While the average person panics over quarterly earnings, social media trends, or the latest public scandal, highly successful legacy builders are making moves that won't mature for decades. They understand the true nature of compound time. Let me explain. Compound time means that the earlier you plant systemic seeds, the more time does the heavy lifting. A business started in your 30s compounds for decades. A technology platform built in your 40s transforms industries for generations. An educational institution funded in your 50s shifts entire cultures long after you're gone. At this level, the biggest variable is not effort, not genius, but early initiation and durable design. They start early. They design to last. And then, they get out of the way. They allow the machine to breathe. Because they know, true legacy lives in machines that no longer require the creator to run. This is how nations were built. This is how religions endured. This is how generational industries emerged. By operators who mastered systems over self. And that brings us to perhaps the final invisible habit. They view themselves as temporary stewards, not permanent kings. Highly successful people who reach this stage have killed the ego fully. They don't cling to power. They prepare succession obsessively. They engineer replacements. They create leadership pipelines. They decentralize power structures so no single point of failure can kill the system. Because they understand that if their empire requires them to remain at the center, they have failed to build real legacy. True builders aim to exit the throne, not die on it. Because only then does the system become immortal. And now, as we enter the final stages, you will see how these invisible habits intersect to create not just personal success, but civilization-level operating mastery. We've now reached a place very few people ever even glimpse, let alone operate in. Because once highly successful people master internal discipline, momentum, leverage, and legacy architecture, something strange begins to happen. They start transcending competition entirely. They exit the game everyone else is still fighting in. They step into what can only be called the game of one. The average person lives in constant competition, trying to outperform, outshine, outhustle others in their space. Even many so-called successful people secretly live trapped in comparison loops, obsessed with being slightly ahead of their peers. But the rarest individuals, the ones who sustain generational dominance, understand a far more powerful truth: there is no competition at the top. Not because no one else is talented, but because almost no one else is willing to operate with the invisible discipline required to reach these levels. You see, when you build systems that run on integrity, strategic thinking, emotional sovereignty, leverage, and legacy architecture, you're no longer competing for the same limited pie. You're constructing entirely new games, where you set the rules. Highly successful people stop playing finite games and start designing infinite arenas. This is why you'll see them often step into entirely new industries, and dominate there too. They go from tech to media, from business to philanthropy, from politics to cultural shaping. Because they're not attached to any one arena. They're attached to their process mastery, which works everywhere. At this stage, they've developed something I call fluid domain transfer. Most people are specialists, good at one skill, in one industry, in one context. Highly successful people become platform generalists. Because they've stacked systems thinking, emotional mastery, strategic leverage, decision-making, clarity, people architecture, infinite learning cycles. These mental and operational assets are universally transferable. Whether running a tech company or building a political movement, the same frameworks apply. This is why these individuals become dangerous across multiple industries. Their playbook travels with them. While others need 20 years to build expertise in a new field, they can enter new markets and build world-class execution in a fraction of that time, not because they know more facts, but because they control the systems that produce knowledge. Now listen carefully, because this next part is where the gap becomes unbridgeable for most people. Highly successful people have built time dilation control. The average person experiences time reactively. They're constantly behind. Behind on email, behind on projects, behind on opportunities, behind on obligations. Highly successful people manipulate the very flow of time itself. How? They compress years of learning into months through accelerated feedback cycles. They compound decades of capital growth through asymmetric deal structures. They install operational leaders who free their calendar for high-leverage thinking. They eliminate 90% of decisions through system design, preserving cognitive energy for the few moves that shift the entire board. To the outside world, it looks like they're getting more done in 1 year than others accomplish in 10. And it's true, but not because they work harder. It's because they've manipulated how much result density fits inside every hour. They're not busier. They're simply operating in a higher dimensional layer of execution. Now, let's go even more advanced. At this stage, they've also mastered polarization immunity. The average person desperately seeks universal approval. They want everyone to like them, agree with them, praise them. This attachment paralyzes risk-taking, bold moves, and controversial decisions. Highly successful people operate with a completely different frame. The bigger the game, the more inevitable the polarization. They expect critics. They expect misunderstanding. They expect backlash. And they operate anyway. Because they understand that at scale, pleasing everyone is mathematically impossible. Impact requires choosing who you serve, and who you're willing to repel. They build clarity of alignment. Who is their core audience? Who are their strategic partners? What values are non-negotiable? What markets are aligned with their thesis? And once clarity is established, they ignore the noise entirely. They're not callous or arrogant. They're focused. Because they know. Energy spent managing public perception is energy stolen from building real systems. You cannot build empires while micromanaging opinion. And the bigger your system grows, the louder the noise becomes, unless you've built psychological insulation to move through it unfazed. This is why these operators often seem emotionally indifferent to controversy, envy, or criticism. They've simply built narrative detachment. They control their internal story. They allow external stories to swirl without destabilization. They let outcomes speak for themselves over decades. And while the masses rage in short-term debates, they're quietly extending EIR timelines another 20 years. Now, here's the rarest layer of all. At this level, highly successful people shift from control to stewardship. In early stages, success often requires obsessive control of details, of teams, of quality standards. But once systems are built and matured, these individuals release control, not because they stop caring, but because they've engineered systems capable of operating beyond any one person's control. They transition from operator to architect to steward. The business no longer needs daily involvement. The capital flows through autonomous investment vehicles. The leadership teams evolve through internal pipelines. The cultural DNA enforces quality standards automatically. Their role becomes directional nudging, small calibrations that preserve long-term trajectory, while allowing autonomous growth underneath. This is the ultimate evolution, systems that self-govern. It's why you'll see some billionaires disappear from public view for years, not because they're inactive, but because their systems have matured into living organisms that function without micromanagement. This is where personal freedom and systemic perpetuity converge. And from here, many highly successful people begin channeling their energy into entirely new arenas of meaning, nation shaping, scientific funding, global philanthropy, cultural reengineering, civilization architecture. Because they've built machines that now fund and free them to engage in world-scale games. This is not ambition. This is architect-level thinking. They're not chasing bigger yachts. They're designing systems that bend the arc of human progress itself. And this, right here, is where we approach the final dimension of the hidden habits. Where personal mastery transforms into civilizational leverage. Now we arrive at the peak. The most concealed, most sacred layer of all. This is where highly successful people operate on a plane so rare that most people will never even see its edges. This is not about wealth. This is not about achievement. This is not even about legacy as most understand it. This is the domain of civilizational architects. At this level, success has fully transcended personal desires. These individuals are no longer building for themselves. They are designing structures that directly influence the arc of entire nations, industries, and human evolution itself. And they do it through an invisible principle that governs every decision, every action, time horizon extension. You see, while the masses think in days, weeks, or at best, quarters, even many, successful, individuals think in decades. But at this highest level, these architects think in centuries. They've fully embraced one brutal truth of reality. Everything you build for yourself eventually dies with you. But systems, when properly designed, can reshape humanity for hundreds of years. These people no longer seek personal immortality. They seek systemic immortality. They operate on a game board that no longer resembles what most call business or success. Let's break it apart. First, they design what I call irreversible systems. These are mechanisms that, once created, cannot easily be undone by market crashes, political shifts, or even global instability. They build structures into educational reform that shifts how generations think, economic infrastructure that makes entire industries dependent on their platforms, scientific funding that permanently alters technological acceleration, policy influence that redirects national priorities across administrations. Their moves may seem small in the moment, but like placing a stone upstream, over decades, they redirect the entire river of history itself. This is civilizational compound interest. Now, how do they maintain clarity at such overwhelming scales? Through compression of complexity into simplicity. Highly successful people at this level understand something few do: complexity destroys execution. The human brain collapses under too many variables. So while their systems are vast, their principles remain shockingly simple. What does not compound, we don't build. What requires us to remain central, we eliminate. What can survive extreme volatility, we prioritize. What scales autonomously, we invest into. What requires fragile reputation management, we avoid. With these few axioms, they navigate impossibly large systems while avoiding the fatal traps that destroy most empires. Second, they engineer multi-generational operator pipelines. They understand that human capital is fragile across generations. The founder is rarely duplicated in the next generation. So they build institutional DNA that continually produces, trains, and elevates high-capacity operators who carry the vision forward without diluting standards. They invest into leadership academies, internal vetting systems, psychological training, and moral frameworks that don't simply teach skills. They cultivate thinking models capable of stewarding power responsibly. Because they know empires do not collapse from market shifts. They collapse from leadership decay. Third, they wield narrative architecture. At this level, they no longer simply play with capital or operations. They shape narratives that influence entire cultural operating systems. Because every civilization runs on stories. Stories about what's possible. Stories about what's moral. Stories about who deserves power. Stories about where value lives. Highly successful people embed their systems into these stories, not for propaganda, but to ensure their architectures remain aligned with cultural momentum rather than fight against it. This is why you'll often see their companies, institutions, and foundations deeply embedded into national identities, education curriculums, or cultural discourse, invisibly steering what billions believe is normal. Now, here's where we cross into the most private territory of all, where even most billionaires never reach. It is the layer of existential succession. At some point, these individuals confront the truth that even their identity as the builder must die. They engineer systems that deliberately minimize their own influence, because they know that over time, personal centrality breeds fragility. They install full sovereignty into their organizations, removing themselves entirely while ensuring the DNA survives. They actively dismantle any structures that require their charisma, name, or presence to function. They build automated governance. They design self-regulating feedback loops. They distribute power across checks and balances. They encode failsafes against future corruption. And once this final architecture is stable, they fully let go. Because their ultimate victory is not building an empire that lasts while they live. It's building a system that thrives for centuries without them. And this is the final invisible habit of the world's most successful, complete ego death. They exit their own identity as founder, owner, leader, and become simply the initiator, the seed planter, the ghost behind the machine. They become unnecessary to the system they once built. And this, far more than any wealth, title, or legacy, is the rarest form of success a human being can achieve. The creation of something so durable, so independent, so antifragile, that it continues bending the arc of civilization long after the architect has vanished from history. You see, when most people talk about success, they speak of money, titles, fame, lifestyle. But here, at this summit, success has transformed entirely into systemic permanence, self-regenerating architecture, invisible global leverage, intergenerational civilization shaping. This is why most will never see it. Not because it's inaccessible, but because the path requires years of invisible internal discipline, brutal emotional sovereignty, ruthless self-examination, endless system design mastery, complete ego detachment. And almost no one is willing to pay that price. But for those who do, for those rare architects, the rewards are not luxury. The reward is something far more powerful, permanent influence on the future of humanity.